Are Yelang Digilash. And the Nasan de Lermichang to the page and Lucina Kawan and Gore, Bad on the Kawasambore, Nirmish Bemasig, Lama Zachimoya was usual that the Nigi, Rimishes and pair the pair that the Nigga one share, Gumbura, Dineza, Paya, Warrior of Chasa, Dineza down to Nakohavia was Shurarwa, and the Mase, that's in the Gubanana. And the Jadorimichi page to go on Ayagi, and the next years at the Pemasit, Yaward, the nigger on to go on red, your combo what anima. Then Yaman the Karmchik and Gorma, the nigger that married is that Combore, and Jadorimichi Lama Yawore, the Chabet, Ayawo, Cavalier, and the nigger on the go Yawashure. Yama Jamul Michu to go much and Nangor Machan, Kumburwa, Nangor, Yomaraja, that image.
Before we start tonight's presentation, I just want to mention that next weekend we are really greatly fortunate here in that Linga Rinpoche, he's coming to our environment here to offer both a teaching and 2 initiations. And this is something really I want to draw your attention to, particularly how fortunate we are. He is an excellent and reliable teacher, and opportunities to encounter great beings like this are rare. And whilst it's rare, again, our great good fortune is that a month later, then another great being and another reliable teacher, Jado Rinpoche, he is also coming here, and he'll be offering the Kalachakra retreat, and then we'll be offering the Kalachakra initiation, and then we'll be offering the retreat thereafter. And this too is something very rare. His Holiness, up to now, it's really just been His Holiness who's been offering the Kalachakra initiation. So now to receive it from Jado Rinpoche, this is something also very special. So we have these 2 remarkable teachers coming here in a short space of time. So I just want to draw your attention to it, because these things are uncommon. And that in a stream of lifetimes, when you have the opportunity to meet teachers like this, it really is something quite special.
Nadin ma Nangising to Jedi, Kissing ma Dushu in my Yama Shujarwa, Nemiji, Diamonzuki, Kewata, Miki, Legi, Nemiji, TV court, and Nemiji, because a TV court in my Shujarwa.
We'll return to the text. So where we've been is we've come to looking at the non-virtuous karma and its effects. So we looked at the 10 non-virtues, then we looked at how karma can be made very heavy. And now we come to the third part in this presentation, which started on page 123. And now we come to a presentation of the effects. I mentioned just very briefly in the final segment last time, but we'll restart there now at the top of page 135.
And to devil Masuna sum the Nashungore Sungtua, Neming Teboda, Gutin Teboda, and Daba, Nem Wongitibu such.
So we've looked at the 10 non-virtuous actions. Now we come to look at their effects. Thereafter, we'll look at the virtuous actions and their effects. So effects or results, they are presented in the threefold division. So we're at the top of page 135, a presentation of their effects. We see it has 3 points: the fully ripened effect, the effect concordant with the cause, and the dominant or environmental effect.
She do some children chonsum like them big sum more.
So looking at the first, the fully ripened effect. Since each of the 10 paths of action depends on whether the basis, the 3 poisons, is small, intermediate, or great, the fully ripened effect is also threefold.
kunlong shuk chechung wangi da bin so chi be le chi sa ben nam so chi be le kunlong de ya ni le kunlong shuk chenpo chi da an jing da chung su myung gu wa de ne ge ni chagdangi chabe ong che pe ne chabe de shuk chenpo da jing da chung long ge na mari be ong che ba da mong be ong che ba da mong be de shuk chi su myung gu wa de ne za da 데니기 소주비게 소주리 삼로 배 숙천부 왕의 전 사반에 레디 아니 레 체와 첨보체 안데네 군노데 정지나 레디의 정시 정제 대군노 슈제라 니버셔 충충러시나 레디 아니 충충러 샤그리에서 지사 레디를 소주비 레디를 첨보다 정당 충무세 숨제 디나신다 소주바다 마진벨레다 레람 주보레레야 충무다 정당 첨보 예세 숨숨스진의 용거리에서 송도다.
As we see here, the motivation can vary in strength. So here in particular, if we look through the lens of the strength of the affliction as part of the attitude. So the affliction can be confused ignorance or attachment or anger. But the defining part of this is not which affliction, but the strength of the affliction, whether it is minor, intermediate, or great. And in dependence on the strength of that motivating affliction comes about the strength of the result.
아데네 레데르 숨여바 인자 최종 징충 첨보다 징다 충우 숨여바서 디 제부딜라다 징당 충우다 네 첨보 숨용으로 데네 인자다 베네 소초바다 볼라 차샤반에서 오데 소초바 소 첨보 레레 첨보 주보 레레에서 답변은 소주비 레 첨보 사바이나 첨보 사바나 디게 가와기레세네 안 제보디 냐와기리에서 당보 냐와 첨보 디게 소주비 레 슉 첨보 주바나 뉴베 첨보 주나 디게 제보디 안 가와기레세네 마 냐와 마기리에서 네명이 제보시 올데.
So we see that the basis, the affliction, is of varying strength, and this then has a direct impact, because that is the strength of the cause being created. This has a direct impact on the result. So an illustration of killing is given. So we'll just skip half a sentence, because in the Tibetan it ends with how we start the English. So we see the illustration of killing is given. So there can be a great strength to killing, depending a great result. If a great act of killing and so on, and then the varying results come from that. So what makes a great act of killing is the strength of the motivation. That is what makes it a great act.
미상아 로임 라소바다 데니기다 주보레레기 개와 가서 미개와 첨보 있나 제보디 냐와기리에서 오다니 주보가리네 첨보 있나 냐와기리에서.
And so if it's a great act of killing and so on, in other words, in terms of the 10 non-virtues, whether it is that of stealing or sexual misconduct, or the ones of speech or the mind, whichever it may be, if it's a great act of powerful motivating affliction, you are reborn as a hell being, and through each of the intermediate ones, you are born as a hungry ghost, and through each of the 10 small ones, you are reborn as an animal.
저는 첨보를 냐와기리에서 주보를 첨보다 징디게 가와기리에서는 이달기리에서 대신에 소주바다 마진발라바데 담보 소주 제가 결혼년 로다 소 담보 소주바데 시르마 디나진다 소주바 나신 마진발렘발라서 주보 차상기 첨보되나 제부 냐와기리에서 다 되는 징기 아니 되게 주보 징레레 주디게 징이나 안 주보레게 가와기리에서는 이달기리에서 이 징기 징주보레레 이다당 다 충우스 다 충중은 되게 주보레레게 가와기가선 뉴럴기리에서 디에는 가와송을 세ing오시를 송 파바토미게 세ing오시스 비중나 송을 해제래.
So I just want to make sure that this one point which is expressed here but not emphasized is very clear, that whilst the illustration is given of killing, that if one has a powerful affliction motivating the act of killing, one will be reborn as a hell being, or if it's an intermediate strength of affliction, it will lead to rebirth as a preter or hungry ghost. And if it's as a light or a slight a motivating strength of the motivating affliction, one will be reborn as an animal. So this is not just for killing. This is for any of the 10 non-virtues. So this is the meaning of killing and so on. And else we have of the 10 intermediate ones. So again, I want to make sure it's clear that this is relating to all the non-virtues. The strength of that motivating affliction will determine that whether it will lead to a rebirth in either if it's great, in the hells, if it's intermediate, as a spirit, and if it's slight, then as an animal.
And that is such a big as a saying motion. Such a big donala carson and doleni chungru debu dode sonso osore. It's not such a big donala carson and chungu digi and idala kigres, tin digi, dundul kigres, sonores. That the same motion ala ding digi, idala kigres, chungu digi, dundul kisonroa. That such a big donala di doce and the chungu digi and idala kigres, ting digi and the dundul kigres, sonores.
And what's presented here is in accordance with the levels of yogic practice, but in the sutra, the 10 ground sutra, then the effects of the smaller intermediate ones are said to be the other way around. In other words, that a small or slight non-virtue leads to rebirth as a spirit, whereas an intermediate strength a non-virtue leads to rebirth as an animal. So these two are presented in the sutra in the opposite way.
That in the mini devote, that in a good devote, so that good in devote the Karimur Senada and Androne and Casore, that so to be leggy, good devotee, Androne, Milke Gas, that so to be leggy, naming devotee, Androli Magigorwa, then Androl Man Kebaina, that then a Tarche, Milke Bainas, and the Karimur and the Seton Chagres, Rimbater, Seton dance. So to be leggy table, you doing it de la. So to be leg sa digi by Newal Magewalin, digi that Newania Tarche and Milkevaina, in a young Yama so to be lady, you doing it over the Milkewalin by the median at Seton.
So of the 3 types of effects or results, that was the first, the fully ripened result, which is the fully ripened result is the life into which you are born. Now the second type, the effect concordant with the cause. So this then, so we have each of the 10 non-virtuous parts of action also gives rise to an effect concordant to the cause, so that even when you have left the lower rebirths and take rebirth as a human being. So here it's now describing as when the fully ripened effect in the low realms has been exhausted and one is now reborn as a human, one will experience non-virtuous causes, non-virtuous karma, in a negative way in terms of the effect concordant to the cause. The first being, born as a human, your life will be short.
Na majimba lembadi ruwa kumago majimba lembige ledigi and ma neming devodi ngansol maji. Then ngansol geje ngansol tarsi mil geba inayang deji ledigi devo and guding devo the kalongers and me geba and me delia and the lonju pombas and lonju going.
And this presentation is still in accordance with the 10 non-virtues. So the effect concordant with the cause of killing is that when born as a human, your life will be short. The effect concordant with the cause of stealing, when born as a human, you will lack wealth. So the second there is from the effect concordant with the cause from stealing.
Nadine, that loim, nadinegi, chige, yimbainada, that Miss Hajubigi, Denegata, Rabjoina, Miss Hajubigi, Tipa Chiliora, Denegi, Miss Hajubilegi, naming devotee, Nansol Makiache, that Dene and Ansola Tarchi, Milkeva Inaya, and the Garion Mosene, and Sosugi Kyoina, chuma masong wala soba da ane yanji bume ina kyowa masong wala soba di yunguri eshe chuma masong wala diwa dangas.
And then the result concordant with the cause of sexual misconduct. So this is relating to the result that will come for the non-ordained accumulating the non-virtue of sexual misconduct is that your partner will leave you.
다데네 나기데 난 주인시비게 대부 내민 대부 나선 마게다 데네게 다데네게 야 타르체 아니 밀게바 이나야 다디 규딩이 되고 가려용으로서는 꾸와 망와다스 꾸와 망와셀이야 아니 지금 미 결혼기 시에바 결혼이지 유엔나 그 민두 신규 민두세야다 아니 결혼이지 꾸와디가 망고 그래서 결혼기 장부제나 장부제마서세야다 아니 거런데 유엔나 민두세야다 되네게 꾸르딥제가 망고리 그래지.
Then the effect concordant with the cause of the four of speech. So starting with the first non-virtue of lying, there the effect concordant with the cause is that you will be slandered. So this is slandered or deprecated, spoken down to. So for example, if you're talking honestly, people say, no, you are lying, and so forth. So people will deprecate you or slander you, talk badly to or about you.
that 참아 제비기 내민기 되보디 나솔마게 다데네 규딩이 되보들라 나솔야 타지 밀게와 이나야 규딩이 되고 소소 자오당 제와서 소소기 tum부 요바다 파카데 루레 카데기레스 tum부 요바디게 소소 조보디게 조보 많이 바샤로야다 안 소소기 되네 카데줘야 차기레스 자오디 tum부디 tum부면 바샤로 자오당 제와서.
So then, the next one of speech, the divisive speech. So first, just to make sure the context is clear, when the non-virtue of divisive speech is accumulated, should it ripen as the fully ripened effect, that will lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And depending on the strength of the motivating affliction, one can be born in the hells as a spirit or as an animal. And then when that has been exhausted, that the fully ripened effect is exhausted and one is born as a human, one will still potentially experience the effect concordant to the cause from divisive speech, and that would be you'll be separated from loved ones.
이도 묘 자퇴바 직 미년바 자망고 퇴 직 미년바 몽고 이리 몽고 되게 자퇴 그래서 퇴바디 용을 해서.
Likewise with a non-virtue of harsh speech. So again, when this is accumulated, it propels a rebirth, leading to it ripens as the fully ripened effect. This will be in one of the lower realms, and which lower realm depends on the strength of the motivating affliction. And then when the effect concordant with the cause ripens, when later one is born as a human, that of harsh speech will be that one will hear unpleasant speech. Likewise, the effect concordant to the cause of idle speech or speech that has no real purpose or meaning, others will not listen to you.
난 이유스면서 납심내심 로타숨 책으로 단 납심기 레기 규딩이 되고들라 가령하서네 안 밀게 바이나 되네 미팅들이야 차과 숙제 용을 해서.
And then that's looking at then having looked at the four effect concordant to the cause of the four verbal non-virtues, now to the three mental. So again, these can ripen when the fully ripened effect will be rebirth in the lower realms, and then the effect concordant to the cause for covetousness is one's attachment will predominate.
단 뇌심이 규딩이 되고들라 가용으로서는 네 안에 당와 control some control mangali shukche kasli desire.
And the effect concordant to the cause of harmful intent is that anger will predominate.
Eda lokta gi da jebege lokta gi da gyuding jebu da kanasene mongba marikba mongba shukche ali she chawali desire.
And the effect concordant to the cause from wrong views is that confused ignorance will predominate.
And the gyuding jebu dene da dabi jebu se dabi jebu se de dikariungure lamna dan dinegi hande juborege dabi yungurwa da so jebe ni chi din sadung da men da jebu so tu chuma so san.
So these two that we've looked at, the fully ripened effect and the effect concordant with the cause, this affects one as an individual. Now we come to the third type of effect, and that is how the effect ripens in our external or surrounding environment. So this is the dominant or environmental effect. The dominant or environmental effect of killing is that in the surrounding environment, food, drink, medicine, harvests, and the like will have little potency.
Jizanda soji bigi jebu the dabi jebu dile da sosugi kalaro chin da jima mirke ba na so da ne gyuding jebu mirke ba ne mi tendelia sosugi da jike never chin men ro sa na men digi nuba shira me de ane kalaro sa na kalagi juri ke shira su nubalia su bolisha pem nuba me de ro sa dong men da denege pandemia ba chi nuba chunjung ma me de yungure sa ti do da men ro sa ne never ne chi men sa na men de never ya ko ta ma ka che men sa de lamsa ya ko ta to ya yunguro ka che ti che sa ne men de nuba chunjung chi de men de sa ba na ne de ya ko ta ma to ya cha de ti men ge nuba de chunjung da ne kala is sa ba ne ju de ke shira me de ro shi.
So in the same way, the effect concordant with the cause was presented for each of the 10 non-virtues, so too here for the dominant or environmental effect. So when born as a human, the environmental effect, the effect that one's environment has on oneself as a result of killing is that, for example, the food that you eat, you will not find it to be, you won't receive nutritional benefit from it. Or the medication or medical treatment that you receive, it will not lead to healing. So in this way, one experiences the environmental effect of having killed.
Kumakuwe majimbe bigi legi that dabi tibu kaligari lamna majimbe lemba ni temba dan charchewa dan ane devu nyunga so osa.
And these are again through the experience of a human experiencing the environmental effect of previous non-virtue. So the second then is that of stealing. The environmental effect of stealing is that there will be great droughts, torrential rains, poor harvests, and so forth.
Jisanda majimbe lembige dabi tibu karasan temba da sido sosugi dondor tawaina da chaba majapche ane jebu gitugo amara te chaba majapche temba sido chaba majapaso kam dene jebu letugo amare dire. ane a직 chaba japna chaba shukchemo chaba mangtaje ya dondor tiyu chela taje jebu yabu kimado chi chagoro denegi jejane jebu so ane nyunyumado amara jebu kebane nyunyumado rago amara yesire.
The environmental effect then of stealing that is experienced is that, for example, when crops are planted, there'll either be a lack of rain or an overabundance of rain. So great droughts, torrential rains leading to poor harvests and so forth.
Adine da loyemgi dan dabidibo karyongorasine da desa sajidelia damzabdan jenji mawadan nyammigo sosos.
And then the environmental effect of sexual misconduct, and I'll just change one word. The environmental effect of sexual misconduct is there will be foul swamps, excessive filth, unpleasant experiences, and so forth.
Eda damzabda sene sajepene damba da pen chikzaru yedigen and jarjes and pe nyomaro churo dene nyoma zoba yudige ane deniki tenzi maa yongre sajil masana dena sosolya ane sem makiwa nyam miga wasen sem makiwa sona dena siungre ese.
So these environmental effects of sexual misconduct, so one will be in an environment of foul swamps, excessive filth, and unpleasant experiences means that one's mind will be unhappy. What one experiences will lead to one's mind being unhappy.
Dan dreamawage dabi tebo karyong rasene shingle dan duju bege ane legi takyabra migura sosos.
The environmental effect of lying is that any work, whether in fields or boats and so on, will not succeed.
Shingle city that disorder been a dream of David Tibodella, been a shingle master, shingle Mishanda, Mishandaji, Tabne, don't know what you give you in a social raja, social tabdu, don't know Yawiki go maris. She's not take Gavas, Yawiki go maris. Yama Mishanda legally, Delia don't know Yawiki gore. That's Mishandas and social raja, social Bistadu, social don't know Yawiki go maris. Shingle answer. Da duju ba sede zogi dadi nyama ne da drupsin pa ke mi orya yorwa nganzo de taxi na chirwa andi dina shi mi shanda ge beju ta de mi zuhen ma bo ra go res da soso la le yodu da mi zuhen ra go nyu ma da ra go ma ti ga resne di zum mo da be ti bo res da the res chesa mi shanda ji du ya bo yo che soso gi che yodu soso ya ani mi zuhen ma ra ju ne mi zuhen ma ra nyu che ani ka so re shin le ne don do ya bo ki ro ma che ba di zum mo ge da be ti bo res.
So the environmental effect of lying, as we see, one's work in agricultural work will not be successful. And boats, here I guess we're saying better translated as ferries. So to be, for example, like these days we use taxis. In the old days one would need to cross a river with a ferry and one will arrive and will be sorry, the ferry is full and you left behind, and the ferry will cross and you will have to wait for it to get enough people on the other side to fill up, to return. So this would be the environmental effect of lying.
미션다게 당보 미션다게 배지당고로와 배지당제 다 소소랑이 레가디난 지겐선 미션다는 게 중요해지 답변에 texte 중요해 다 미션다 솔종사를 레가레와 당보 그런 배지당도 콜미즈 하고 주고로와 자고로와미 다 거저는 안주 수인 레레제 다 소소는 안주 배지당도 미주현 약보라고 말해지 다 제가 당보 미션다 제도 약보라고 소소의 제도 소소래야 미주현 약보 말아와래 디 말아와 대가를 깨내서는 야마기디 준시베게다 되버렸어야다 신가로비는 당보 미션다 지게 benn soja inada singa na ji lega chile ya ko lamro ya ko jugo chema ko tsala so so chik lenje le nyoba inada lemba na lenje ta lega le tin ya ko jugo ma de lamro ya ko jugo ma de to na ji sungu do.
So for example, if you see someone who's got a very successful, who's self-employed as a taxi and they're actually doing quite well. So you buy a taxi and it doesn't go well at all. So this, why does it not go well for you? Because you've created the same kind of conditions. You have your taxi, but it does not succeed. And this is because it's a ripening environmental effect of lying.
On that time, GBG, WGB Karyong Sene, such a barbuda, tormenta, Druka so
The environmental effect of divisive speech is that the area will be bumpy and uneven, making it difficult to travel and so on.
That's such a barber, so the said about the daughter, that the nigger, Mambu Yudige, and Dineshi Barburche, and Barbur down. Thomas, such a yard tobuja, the Maworish Majid, draw the ya again, Matul, Ma Bab draw the and Dineshi, the Nikalakabas, Do Lamgal Bat, Do Dora, Dinigi, Mamburian, Lamgal draw Havorua. 지다 디네자 바르보다 토마여바자 디네 파수 dro바이나 드라이를 깔래하고 요구레스 디네기다디 디도 다비티고레스.
So again, the environmental effect of divisive speech is that the area will be bumpy, so that's quite clear, and uneven in the sense of if one is traveling, then the ascents will be steep and the descents will be steep. So therefore, traveling, whether especially if one's walking, but even if one's driving, this is quite challenging to do because uneven. So steep ascents, steep descents.
Is that the motor drossadina that Lumbashanda Diva, the Lamgaya that the Barber draw how was sure what that you are in the Lamgaya Wajanya Wading, Kanamin, what the Niki Dapete what Jeramin.
So perhaps some of you on your travels, you've been to countries where the roads are not like here, where you are driving in really some quite precarious situations. So here we're very fortunate. Our roads are pretty, it's very flat and the roads are well maintained and the traffic's okay. So our roads here are actually quite good.
That's Gyomo Mawa Sosos.
The environmental effect of harsh speech is that the area will be full of logs, brambles, rocks, pebbles, potsherds, and so forth.
That in that Delia Sacho Sadikipa Dongdum Sedida, Bene Karsore, Shin Dumbu. Nashin, that's such a Yapme, that's Chagro, Denison, and it's Hermam Muyed again. On Dotar, Denig, Dotachi Manguyed again, Dota, Samala, and Jamala, so the Doshun, the Pemanguyed again, the Denigi, then the Jomo said, Ansi Sava, then Medala, Chago, Charo, then Manguyed again, or the Negi, the Soda, Tsuzuki, and that Dartero Chagores, the younger.
This is quite clear. The environmental effect of harsh speech is that the area will be full of logs, brambles and thorns, and then rocks of varying sizes, rocks, pebbles, potsherds, and so forth.
That's it.
The environmental effect of idle speech is that fruit trees will not bear fruit or will bear fruit out of season and so forth. So what we're seeing here is that when there's these non-virtuous causes, one gets unwanted results. So even though one has fruit trees, they will not bear fruit, or they'll do so at the wrong time of year, and therefore will not be usable.
And that Napsimgi Dabitibo Kaliris, and Napsimgi ni Punzo Tamje, Lodan, Dawada, Sha Rerea, Nyamba Soso, Sidada. Digi Penamazuki Benjoro Chivene, and the Chi Lori Ma New Dryada, and they are Dowry New Drea, and Panya, Panyam Charo, Yam Drea, to do Sung Resasuma.
And then coming to the mental non-virtues, the environmental effect of covetousness is that everything excellent will deteriorate year by year, month by month, and day by day, and so forth.
And then the Nusimgi, da Karingurasne, Dadet, Lekariasne, Neamda, Neobada, Neogowada, Chubada, Paroja, Masole, Chulong, Mama Sosos.
The environmental effect of harmful intent is a multitude of epidemics, injuries, infections, disputes, wars with enemy troops, and so forth.
That is not Nusimgi, the native about it. That's saving to our to actually check what the Niki Nusa, Neamda, and it never Mawa, Nusim Mawa, never Mawa, the Niki, and Ne that never get the name the near parts of Guayala Sobata, and the Chuposhoya Mawa, the near parts of Majagi, and the Machuma Yungure, and the Simian Yungure said in the rules.
Such results are sadly all too evident in our world. And where we see strong effects or results in evidently present, we know that the cause that led to that would also have been a strong cause, a powerful cause.
That in a Loda gi Garingorasene, Nugi, Jidina, and Jungkung Chok Nuba Sosa. I don't know Garsos Nangaji that Jidina, Jungkung Chok, the Danganjugi, the Sashi Olia, Serata, Denigi, and the Chigyoba. Nyong Rugres, no Rugres, and Mavacha Rugres. And the Lota Lotagi, Nugi, Jitin, Jungkung, Cho Nuba Sosos.
And finally, that of wrong views. The environmental effects of wrong views is an environment where the best sources of provisions will be exhausted and so forth.
That is Migivi Legi, that Lelam Judigi, that Neming Jebo, and Tabi Jebo, and Juding Jebo, then the Yungres and the Peasant or to set it in that, to see it, Senjiros Mason Tushin Saturday. She's around.
So then these are the illustrations making clear the kind of ripening effects one can expect from non-virtuous karma.
And do you
why in this presentation does it not present concordant with cause habitual?
So there are two types of effect concordance with the cause, that of habitual and that of behavioral, I think it is. So why is the second one not here?
Juding Devo Sundua. Just I did the thing you were reducing it, the Mason and Yura. Then you didn't so many Javara, that it's the name you
in brief, because this is the middle Lamrim, so it's an abbreviation of the great Lamrim, where that is. So in several places in the text, then certain points are not covered that would be covered there because it is an abbreviated presentation.
Yeah. Gevele, Nibala, Nis, Gevele, the La Gevele, and Gevele, Tivos, or the Nis, a Garbele, and Tivos.
So then continuing virtuous actions and their effects. So now we've concluded looking at non-virtuous actions and their effects. Now we come to virtuous actions and their effects. And this is 2 points, virtuous actions, and secondly, their effects.
That gave a little Emma, Dorje, someone, that thing actually. Migivili, Jubas, di Dochodi, Dachigi, Lunga Yusumi, Migawa, Ju Pang Biggie, and Song Biggie, that Doshos Judy, that Gawachu Chagrada.
So, in brief, virtuous actions are the opposite of non-virtuous actions. In the presentation we had on the 10 non-virtues, these then will be their corresponding opposites. So, the 10 virtuous actions.
I don't know, like our song is in a so chubada, Majimba Lembada, Loyemla, Nimi Sambachen, Give Simna, Dembe, Deda Bomber, Dumbig, Joa Chebada, Damba Tartubar, and Javi Lugi Lesos.
So we're in the middle of page 136, so I've needed to change the translation quite a bit. The meaning is pretty much the same. The translator just omitted a couple of words, but I've had to restructure this line quite a lot, but the meaning of what you have in your books is fine. But anyway, I'll read the corrected translation. These are the physical acts of those who have, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. They have also carried out the performance of correctly refraining from them and have brought this restraint to culmination. So I'll just read it again. These are the physical acts of those who have, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. They have also carried out the performance of correctly refraining from them and have brought this restraint to culmination.
대사 미개와 주들라 류기 미개와 숨가게 미개와 시이기 미개와 숨여와 대주로와 제대 진자다 다들 당보 갈 숨거스네 류기 미개와 안에 숨디 숨거래 지사 류기 미개와 숨도 소줘봐 마진발레바 로인 숨들와 내 숨다 내가 소줘봐다 마진바 로인 예미 삼네 삼바전 될야 예믹다제 다디네 야고 말디 바 예미다 니 예미스다네 되니게 예미 삼전에 계획 삼바다 템바 다딩이 데 계획 삼바다 템바시도 다 안디체네 야고 말에 셈베게 다디치교 말에 셈베 삼다제 안 대다 야다버 넘버 조와 당시 어다디치기 매 셈베게 삼다지고래 야다버 넘버 조와 제바 당시도 다 조와라 마소나 군노라 마소나 제네 야고 말에 셈베 다간지 군노라 소주바다 마침발레바 로임기 파 때네 팔 균다제 대균 통제 다디 지마지 지메 선배게 제두 디방고도 선배 삼라다디 세고다 기회sem나 템바스데 방디기 되베기 되바 삼나게바 되네기 되바께네 되네 양다버 돈비기 조어제바 세도 되네게다 지메 선배 도시네 삼다이스 삼다이로 지 조어제바 조어제바서 돈비 조어제바 되네기 조어제네 담바 타두버 제비게 류 타두버 제도 류길레 게벨레 디사바레스 월다데
So explaining this first sentence, and again I'll read the corrected translation as Geshe goes through it. So it starts with, these are the physical acts. So here we're just referring to the physical non-virtues. Later, but the presentation will be the same if it were the four of speech or the three mental ones.
So you're talking about the...
So we're still with the first sentence. We're staying with the first sentence. So starting with, these are the physical acts. So we're talking about physical acts of and then we'll continue. So to continue. And one is doing so with these are the physical acts of those who, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So they've looked at the faults. They've looked at the acts of killing, stealing, misconduct, sexual misconduct, seeing their faults, recognizing they are non-virtuous, and this results in a virtuous mind in the sense of, I do not want to suffer these results. I do not want to cause harm. I don't want to experience the results of that harm. This is why one has a virtuous mind. The virtuous mind comes from reflecting on killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, recognizing their faults, not seeing it as beneficial. That would not be a virtuous mind. But seeing these acts of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct as faulty, one has a virtuous mind. So this is the first part, and I'll read it again. These are the physical acts of those who have, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So it is really reflecting on these three, killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, that one comes to see their faults, and therefore, by seeing them as faulty, one has a virtuous mind, seeing them as something to avoid. Then this leads to the second part. They have also carried out the performance of correctly refraining from them and have brought this restraint to culmination. So this is the second part. So here the translator missed some words. So I'll read it again. They have also carried out the performance of correctly refraining from them. So what is the performance of a virtuous act? It's refraining correctly from a non-virtuous act. And then remember, these things are 4 parts: basis, attitude, performance, just covered, and then the final one, completion. And has brought this restraint to culmination. That's the end of this sentence. So here we see the different parts in here. The first part of the sentence is the motivation. These are the physical acts of those who have, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. That's the motivation aspect. They have also carried out the performance of correctly, so that's a performance aspect, of correctly refraining from them, and have brought this restraint to culmination. So that's a completion aspect. So in this way, one engages in the virtuous acts of refraining from, from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct.
Givisem Demba said, oh, that's what you the Bangudu Sempige Samaki, Givisem Demba said that, Manzuman Kawachevala, Sochu Pangvi, Kawachevala, she Samba Joa Tartuk said Najin, that's Nambo is Joa, somebody, that's Gunon Masona, that Sochu Bangudu Sempige Samlodi Gunon said, that gave you somebody Gunon Sembas Chagua, Gunon de Che, that she did some gender, she some general, that didn't. Yadabu Domber Joa said that thing some just so chicken may send me some diet chagurada, some diet to go to by the Bendigo, Joa, some diet chagurua, Joa said, some diet. They didn't some done that Bendigo chicken may send me some time and that's Tamalia Taje Jurvada, that chicken may send me some Taje, the Taje by Leon, then so you biggie, Luigi, so you bumpy. Luigi Gawa de Sagor, yes, as soon as water. Tama de la so chicken may same touch at your water, same touch at your water. Joa some jazz may so chicken mess and be some of the Joa de shed on body. That Gigelia, that jig may seem a touch at your water, Dingle could just natch the mother, the so chippy Nazi Yomar. So Jabala Joa the Luigi Jajero, so Jabba the Jajero, so Jabala the Luigi Javajagamidua. That's some Joa the Garson, some died. Luigi Quening said that so jig mess and be some died, Dambodi the Joache. Niba that Tajaba Ligua, the Tardux child, Tardu child. Then the child didn't Luigi lady, so chippy, so you bumpy Luigi lady, Sabares or Gavili Sabares.
Hopefully make this clear to the illustration in relation to killing. So killing being the non-virtue, and then the non-killing would be the virtue. So these acts have the 4 components of, and I'll give it in the order that it will be presented, that of motivation, that of basis, that of performance, and that of completion. So, and now reading it together with the corrected translation. So these are the physical acts of those who with a virtuous mind reflected on the faults of killing in this case. So here, cultivating, so of those 4 branches of a non-virtuous deed, or a virtuous deed, the first is we're looking at is motivation. So here, one cultivates the motivation by reflecting on the faults of killing. So it's through reflecting on the faults of killing, one develops the motivation, I do not want to kill. I do not want to cause this harm to others. I now see it as harmful, and it's harmful to me in terms of the ripening results. So this is how, in terms of the virtuous act, one develops the branch of motivation. And one develops the branch of motivation through the analytical meditation of reflecting on the faults of killing. Seeing the faults of killing, one develops a wish, I will not kill. And then this, I will not kill. So this I will not kill is the mind wanting to abandon killing. This is the virtuous mind. So now again to return to the text, to explain those words there, because we had the word virtuous mind. So what is the virtuous mind here? It is the mind that says, I will not kill. How did it come about? Independence on reflecting on the faults of killing. So that then explains that this part of the sentence a bit. So one cultivates a motivation, the motivation or the virtue of abandoning killing by, firstly, reflecting on the faults of killing, giving rise to the virtuous mind that says, I will not kill. Then, so that's the first of the four aspects of or branches of the virtuous deed of not killing. That is motivation. The basis then is one's having this thought in relation to a sentient being. I will not kill an animal, I will not kill a human, and so forth. So then there's a basis. Then the third is that of performance. So now, for performance and culmination, I'll read my retranslation and then give Geshe's explanation. They have also, so the first line, which we've covered, these are the physical acts of those who have, with a virtuous mind, reflected on the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. And now, they have also carried out the performance of correctly refraining from them, so the performance of correctly refraining from killing, and have brought this restraint to culmination. So what does performance and completion mean in the context of the virtue of not killing? So the performance is not, so in terms of the non-virtue, the performance will usually be something physical. It will be, be something physical. You're doing something. That's what it usually is. In the case of the virtue, you're not doing anything. So not doing anything physical. It is solely a mental process. So it is the mental process that one is going through. This is the performance. And the completion then is also mental, and it is the determined attitude, I will not kill. So in this example now of killing, we see it's divided into these differing components. It won't necessarily be so divided in your way of thinking, but this is how the four components of basis, attitude, performance, and completion are in relation to the virtue of not killing.
다디 조와다 타르둥이리 또 타치 마지게 데스 개발 마드신 곧 규인직을 여러도와 배능하는 데네시어로다 지게 남기는 아주 두장으로 지팅한 그 야생야생 아주 수포로서 야리되지나 다스 쇠네 야고요 말에 선배게 두 삼다제 다고 그냥 소자리 등에 되니 그 쇠네 야고요 말에 견다 되니게 야매받다진 되니 그 두장 수익매 선배게 다 쇠네 지금 말에 선배게 두신 삼다에 되다 운주군으로 차기도와 다 되니 수익매 선배 삼노다제 아니 그 수익매 선배 삼노다로 와다 이내 타마체 para들이야 와다디 마스베네 제일 야갈리기에서 쇠샤신 거로 와데 대지 당보들 수연의 약보여 말씀이 괜다데 수익매 선배게 삼노치 조어로 생에 수익매 선배 독자 등의 수익매 선배 삼노치 단으로 와도 조어 차대로 와다 이내 타마체바체 제일 남자 어디 마스베네 제일 야갈리기에서 쇠샤신 거로 와 지산 탈투요 말와 이내 되니게 지산 되니게다 수익매 선배 삼단다 타주는 저기 수익매 선배 타줘 봐이나 난 그 수익 말을 읽으러와 제가 타셔 봤어야 돼. 타마들 담 봤어야 타셔 봤어요. 되니게 삼나 타셔 손도 있다. 기위리 근데 소치 덤백이 기위리 싸고 그래서.
In terms of performance and completion, this is really just it's again these are it's really one mental process, and they are differentiated in that completion is where one has decided. But it's really one continuum of thought. So to make, again, these four branches of the virtuous karmic act of not killing, hopefully to make it clear in relation to that of one sitting perhaps with one's arm exposed, and an annoying mosquito is buzzing around, wanting to suck your blood. So once annoyed, one recognizes the arisal of the thought to kill. And immediately now, there is a basis, so that first component, because the basis is the mosquito. But now we cultivate our virtuous motivation. And here we think of the faults of killing, that I'm creating the causes that lead me to suffer. This mosquito is not really doing anything wrong, it's just hungry. And so it's just doing its own natural thing. And I don't want to suffer, and I don't want to make it suffer. So therefore, this is now the motivation, I will not kill. And one has a virtuous mind, I will not kill this thing. And one needs to make it a little stronger, because probably this mosquito is not alone in the world, but has many companions. So you need this to be quite firm. And this then will be the ongoing thought process. It may just be moments of performance, and then the final point, the completion, I will not kill. I will endure the annoyance of these mosquitoes. So in this way, one has the basis, one has the cultivation or the motivation, which is really the main part. And then coming to that final completion, in there is also the performance, which is just this long, elongated process of thought coming to, no, I will definitely not kill. It's not a big deal. I can deal with this. I will not kill.
Bendigo marwad chesada sugme sembe samlo khor charwe chelia juwa machimba sugme sembe sem ta choba chile sombaina dai sochu papi ke gewati sa kores da ta ma choba je sugme sambaina ya deni semdi juwa chinsona ane ta choba digo marwa da dondala dambo jowa de sugme sembe samlo khor ne semdi da juwa machimba je da ta chinda Yune ta sugmesime ta chue zangmo che sona cha song bai na deni so chue bi pambi le de gewi le sa go res di na direction.
So to hopefully make it a little clearer, then the difference between performance and completion. So here the completion or culmination is where one is definite. I will not kill. And this is definite. It is unwavering, unchanging. Whereas if one has, I will not kill, but it's not so definite, and eventually one's overwhelmed by annoyance, and then one clears them away, kills them, then clearly one never came to the completion of the virtuous act, and therefore one doesn't accrue the fully complete virtuous act of not killing. So again, then in brief, the difference between the performance and the culmination or completion is that the completion is when the decision is stable.
The Bendigo segment be that mission doesn't so get some touch by now. That's Zangmarwan, then better no route in there. Check it out.
So, for example, this isn't about virtue and non-virtue, but it's again to make the point clear between the difference between performance and completion. So I have diabetes. I know chocolate for me is not something that I can go near. If I've come to a point of completion or culmination in my decision, I will not eat chocolate, then people around me can be eating chocolate and with a smile on their face and maybe groans of pleasure, and I will be fine with it. I will not partake. If I haven't yet come to this definite decision of completion, but I've gone through the thought, I've cultivated a motivation, I've thought about it further, so the performance side, but every now and again, I think, what difference will one chocolate make? Then I clearly have not come to the completion, but have only got as far as the motivation and the performance.
On that person, the Tone, that Chasa, Jibarado, Dine, Deshin, Dosa, ngagi shida da ngagi leshi ro mi gewashi ngagi shida 이게 숨라야 자로스네 이게 개와 숨 대설에 바지바 삼단아 지바레스 언데 나 대신도 나기 시나 이게 숨라야 자로스.
Then returning to the text, here the translation's fine. This is to be applied likewise to the four of speech and the three of mind.
나 개발 가려서 개발이 나게래다 이기래 셰샤고서 대시 담보 숨데다 류기래서 다 나게 되라 나게래서 나게 준식이메 축수식이메 안도션 삼다디 제바데라 나게래서 얘네 다 납심 뇌심 lokta 지기메 삼다지도 다 제바데라 다 이기래서 이기게래서 도샤유래서.
And the text continues, the difference being that they are called actions of speech and actions of mind. So we see also in your translation, the first lines are, these are the physical acts or actions. So it's all, when one's thinking about the verbal virtues and mental ones, one just changed this first part. These are the physical acts, to these are the verbal acts, or these are the mental acts.
다디 도르디로 쉬네 데네스 다데스 다딘 마데스 데스 개바로 제시 쉬베나 디레스 다디마 데지 도르디지 바 룽나바 도나 데네 룽나디 송여 다딘마 데스 개바로 쉬베네 세용고시나리아 가라 송여스네 시 세용고시 송베 세 셰조 시 세용고시 송베사 데네 시당 삼바다 조바다 탈두남 지리바 자르데 소주 바위에 레람라 야나 자르나스 시 자르사다다도 도스티 자르나스 디바들로데.
And then a further change in the text. Again, it's nothing important. So, as stated in the level of yogic practice, this is in relation to what follows rather than what preceded it. So actions of mind, and then you can have a full stop. And then, as stated in the levels of yogic practice, comma, this should be applied to the basis, attitude, performance, and completion as appropriate. Because there are sub-outlines in the Tibetan. And this first part, up to actions of the mind, is the abbreviated presentation, and now a more detailed presentation. Starting with, as stated in the levels of yogic practice, this should be applied to the basis, attitude, performance, and completion as appropriate.
다디딜 가르게바라 가르치는 시 삼바 조와 타둑스는 시가 두시는 송도 지자데 예대진에 될 데네기 마송하자 돌디셰 다디는 마 세용 데네기 송요다 시 삼바 조와 타둑스데 시당아 시데다 이번에 소주 밤에 개비 레기 다스는 시 데네 삼바 조와 타둑 어데네 타둑 남니 제데 지릭바 자르데 다 소주 본위 레람라 자완 자나 아니 디나신다 소주 반의 마신 벌레 말에서 차상을 봐도시 자연스러워 자나 세디바도 로르바 되지네 아디 다제사다 디던다데 다디 양게 셰르바다 시 삼바 조바 타둑스네 파이 개바셰세디 디테스 레레네 시 삼바 조바 타둑스 셰바엔자다 개바셰바세디.
So we see here that these four branches of the virtuous or non-virtuous karmic deed has these four parts: basis, attitude, performance, and completion. And then this process should be applied as appropriate. And then we'll come to the first of example of killing when applied to the path of action of avoiding killing.
지나다 시디가레스네 semje 소주 방위 시디가레스네 semje 시 semje와 semje 수금에 sembe 마 시디마 되 힘을 소바 야지 semje의 추이진의 수금에 sem바데디 다다체가 말와 제자다 시디를 가르스네 semje인 고레스 제자지 semje디 수금에 sembe 시니 semje 셴노 랑레 셴베 semje 사데 숭도와데 semje 시니 semje 셴노스 다 가르소리 랑레 셴베 심제 인고바데 가르스는 하는 저기 소주비게 레람 주 탈투발라 시디 셴레 랑레 셴바 진고를 그니마 然后地波萨对格雷啊，第一把让来先别什么节的话，第些啥新年什么节先罗是让来先别什么节的，但说句没什么别的，都现在西的先什么节的，但三把个人呢，但年米团呢，不对吧？是的，就像什么节说呢？那年米团的什么节说吧？那地列啥列个这个，那个这个经常说的讲了，的那个东方用户的什么别个什么大的捐团节。他说句这个没什么个，帮对个什么，不说句的帮国度什么个，帮对个什么结巴的三把，那这些，你来说吧。
So when applied to the path of action avoiding killing, the basis is another sentient being. So this, you remember from when some weeks ago we looked at the 10 non-virtues. So the basis of killing needs to be a sentient being. It doesn't relate to something inanimate like a tree. So it needs to be towards a sentient being. The basis, the attitude is the wish to avoid it, having seen its faults. So this is what we saw above, when the way one develops the motivation not to do a virtuous deed is to see the faults. It's not merely not doing something, but it's through seeing the faults, one develops the virtuous mind not to do it. So in the case of killing, we saw that this will lead to my suffering in the lower realms, therefore I will not do it. And then this leads to this virtuous mind, or this is that virtuous mind, I will not kill.
那就你说吧，养大把准备对些多，现在这些年先把这把的说吧，就现在说吧养的在说个面上边个东巴的话的，东巴的东巴对些多的就的的，他都你养大把东巴。做吧，是的，他都把，他什么大学吧的，他对你经没，所对你经没，什么他学吧的，他这个没什么什么这当不的这个没，的呢，这些里的这吧这个没什么他学吧中国话，我的他都吃个也是。
Then the last two, performance and completion. Here again, I've just made some minor changes. The performance is to put effort into correctly abstaining from killing, and the completion is the physical act of correctly having completely refrained from it. So I'll just read that again. The performance is to put effort into correctly abstaining from killing, and the completion is the physical act of correctly having completely refrained from it. So as mentioned when it's explaining the beginning of this paragraph, or this beginning of this point, is that the performance is just a continuation of thought. One has developed, through looking at the faults of, for example, killing, one has developed the virtuous mind of, I will not kill. And then one's thinking further, that is the performance. So the motivation leads right into the performance. So the motivation culminates in the virtuous mind of, I will abandon killing. And thinking about it further is the performance leading to the completion, which is the determination, I will refrain from it. I will no longer kill. This is something I will no longer do. So the completion is this definite decision. This is something I will no longer do. And that is the meaning of, and the completion is the physical act of correctly having completely refrained from it.
那这个心间说呢，要不要嘛？心间说别个，说别呢，那这地方啥的，这个那这个。这部东方用过的身边的那什么大呀的，你们是那什么叫说白呢？什么叫说白呢？第不啥？第一这部我说的给你东方用过的身边什么大呀？捐什么大的话，的那什么大呀？这些，这个呢，然后什么叫说白呢？先连女些先刚刚这个是也不嘛什么是的那个什么大呀的，其他的什么叫说白呢？他就什么叫的了？刚刚的东方用过吧？那刚刚这个吧，什么金钱去什么大？第嘛是那说是给的那个说的那说白呢，两个吧，说让个两个吧是，忙把那说让了，刚刚这个东啊这个什么个什么大呢？的那个带着什么叫说具备捐的那通，他的要民度什么个什么大呢？他说觉得帮国度什么个什么大一点，他对吧的，他共同告诉我的三把的 방고도 선배 삼로지게. 대 방고도 삼내당이 다 디님 메심제 소셜 사회의 지금에 선배다 삼로 두스당은 젠다 타쳐봐 예다 심지어 소셜 지금에 선배 삼로 당보디 깨지 당보디다 저거를 차 그래. 타마들다 지금에서 타줘야지 다 탈도 차로 그래. 지나대 지금에 선배 삼로 타줘봐는 다 디네 소셜 방백에 개별레디 사고를 해서 그러다. 제자한테 류기 레라그레 레데레 민가에서는 류기 레라그레 류기 자와 말에 삼다데 삼로디게 소지메 균타 섬게 소지메 섬베 삼로당 데네 삼단 탈톤 셈게다 자와 지메 셈 타지용도 디 레데레 민가에서 류기 레라그레 소주밤 류기 레라고 그래야지 류기 레세야돼.
Okay, so just before I come to what Genla said, I just noticed now a further error in the translation. So just to get it right, otherwise, it's just really contradictory. So this final sentence, the completion is the physical act of correctly having completely refrained from it. This isn't a physical act, it's a mental act. So the physical act is actually the it, refraining from killing. So killing, because you're talking about killing, and that is the physical act. In relation to a different non-virtue, it would be a verbal act or a mental act. So the translation again needs to be changed. So because the physical act really relates to the it. The completion is correctly having completely refrained from the physical act. So just to make sure it's clear that in the virtues, the performance and the completion is mental. It's not a physical act, it's mental. So there's no physically refraining yourself, holding yourself back. It's all mental. So that's just from an aside, and now to what Geshe just said. So the four branches in relation to the virtuous act of not killing is first, it's in relation to something. It can be the mosquito or a person, whatever it may be. But then, so that's the basis. Then the attitude, in particular the motivation, this requires reasoning. So in the moment, you could just have the thought, I won't do it, and that's sufficient. If you have done sufficient reasoning in the past, because this will just be a continuation of that reasoning. You will know why you're not doing it. And this is the important thing in terms of the motivation. And this reasoning has the two components of, I do not want to suffer as the karmic result of killing. Nor do I want to cause, the second part, others to suffer. So both of these should be in one's motivation. I do not want to suffer as the karmic result of this non-virtue, and I do not want to cause others to suffer. So this then is the cultivation of the motivation, or the attitude. And then the completion is, and I will not do this again. So then one has created a complete virtuous karmic imprint of not killing. So where does performance come? So you have the motivation being cultivated with the thought of why I will not kill, and then you have the virtuous mind of I will not kill, and coming to then that final point of and I will not ever kill again. In that space between the virtuous mind of I must abandon killing and I will not kill again, in that space is the performance. Because this really is just one continuation of thought. And this may well be very quick, especially in the moment, as opposed to when you're cultivating this in meditation. The completion is, and I will not kill again. The motivation is that virtuous mind of, that comes from reasoning, that virtuous mind of I'll abandon killing. And that space in between is the performance.
Najalaro Zeroji, Pinukumarku, and Kuegi, Jaladi Mishengi, Jala Zechi, my Shishe. Sambatilla, Ladi Kuna, Kuwaina, and Samdana de la 아니 미션다 젤라고 미션다라 강아체 야고용 말 선배 섬다다 양 구바는 소수의 구의 레사 디레 제봉한 마오바나 소수의 동안 용거 차그레 선배기 되니게捐통제 다 되니게 다 구에도 미션다 젤라 구에도 방구도 선배 삼로디다 아 디레다 군원세 가나 삼바차그로와 시디 제 미션기 제 원위 제제 군로디다 구네 야보민도 선배 구와도 방구도 선배게 구마게의 방구도 선배 삼로디 더 삼바티체 다 조와디 지바레 조와디다 구구메 선배게 삼로디 당보디다 조와디 되니게 좀 구구메 선배 돈베기다 삼로디 다 조와디체 다 구구메 선배 심 타죄디 타르투샤용으로 제자 되니게 타죄베기 레디다 델야 민갈레스 나기 게벨리에스 다들 가서 안마니데 구마사 가서 내가니 류기듯이 샤사다 다들 주인이 나다데 주인들라 다시 주인시에서 시디 미션다지 주인체 다시에 주인시에는 미션의 강을 채봐요 강을 채비 삼다야다 된 주인시에는 랑기 주인기 시에 레사 디테보 동안 용을 쓰면 되네게 주인디 시에바들이야 주인시에 주인기 捐大家的尊的帮护度尊些的帮护度身边三落地的三八的些西些这个是尊过了些三八工作的尊的帮护度身边三八的些是三八些九啊的你尊些个没身边三落的当波的九啊些但些个没身边什他觉的他都些就是那的点那个他这样对点的尊些个没身边 준방 비게 계획을 싸고 계획을 딩하게 될민 나게 내라 그래서 나게 내스 대시다 소치 방법들 루기래 나게 준방 비게 내 계획들 다 나게 내 계획 양결 나도 말하면 체간이 나도 삼로직 단거로 다 아주 준시에게 교인지 삼단 거로와 교인지 어디든지 다도 아주 두스는 주인들의 대신에 약만 두스 교인지 삼단 되네다 다당 준시의 방구도 선배 삼로 군로지 콜 군콘 땅에 준시에 선배 삼단 저로와 대디 가르치 뒤나지 나라 말디디 타주 제바들 디 망부 연구랑 미세코로나 지금에서다 아니 지금에서 저러다 안주이데 나디 담보디 타주한 저기 예와시 시험하지 지금에 선배 삼로딩이 지금에서 준식매 선배 샘 타줘야디다 다 게디바도 시그레 게디마 시그마서 디키 시험하지 않다 보 준식매 선배 샘 타줘야 저러와 델레 타도 두고래 디레데 나게 게벨레라 그래서 된다디래
Just to read that final line again, the completion is correctly having completely refrained from the physical act. So now let's give an illustration then of a verbal act. So a verbal act, for example, lying. So it needs a basis, and that's someone else. And then the cultivation of the motivation comes through the virtuous, comes through reflecting on the faults of lying. And this has the two components. If I lie to someone, I am creating the non-virtuous karma, and I will suffer in the future. I do not want to suffer. Therefore, and I do not want to suffer. Moreover, by lying to someone else, I'm probably causing hardship in their lives, especially if they believe my lie. I'm effective at it. So, and this is the motivation. By reflecting on the faults of lying in relation to self and other, one then develops the virtuous thought, I will not lie. So now the motivation is developed into that motivated, virtuous mind of, I will not lie. And then the completion is when one is definite, I will not lie. So that's really when it's, the exclamation point is there. And that process of time in between is the performance. It can just be seconds, but that is the performance. So this then, in relation to that line, the completion is correctly having completely refrained from the verbal act.
Tajidana do sire. Tajazada dinala and the Sochug Mes, Gumo Mes, somebody, Gedi Badure, said the Gazeres and the Cheven, Naso Gurua. Yenzo Domba, the Rabjung Domba, the Yin Dobalan, and the Garsore, Missicron, and the Sochug Me, Kumaku Mes and Kilinji Gorwadi, Sungorwadi. Then Nisha Tushigi, Yenegi Domba says in Ayora, the Nimichi Ringlis Sungora, Nisha, choosing substituting a Sochug Me, Dombiada, some died, it's the Nimichi, Kumaku Me, Twinshi, Me, Lormches. Did he do you know the Gombe, Nekable, Kososuski, Naso Gurua, Benning, Diring Twinshi Me, Sada, and some died, and they did. Sunshu and the Sunshu really twinshing me at some time, and the name Nasong, just that Rabju in the Guinea, the Dombalin in the Kabla, the so called Missikoron, Jigmes and Big Sungor, Kelenji or Sungorwa. Then Yenig Dombalendu, Nisha Chuji ring a Jigmes and the Kaling Gurwamato. Then the Kalen the Rindu the Gazera Sena, the Nasoing. Down board that Jigmes, same touch, I did what hard to say it is.
So in terms of the completion of the virtuous act, there will be some variety in terms of the duration that one is making this firm decision for. If it's in the context of taking vows, the type of vow being accepted will determine the length of time. So if one, in relation to not killing, is receiving the vows of the ordained or the non-ordained, the lay vows, there one is making the promise, I will never kill again. If one is, in the case of the non-ordained, not receiving the lay vows, but just one-day vows, one is making the promise, I will not kill today. So the completion of the virtuous act is the same, this firm decision, but one is doing it for a differing length of time. And then in terms of, if one is faced with a particular situation and one makes the decision, I will not do this bad deed, then one is making the completion is for this time. Now I will not do it. Or in terms of one's meditation, one there may make a lifelong commitment or just say, I will try for today or this week not to do something bad. Or perhaps you come into class and you're hearing all this talk about this, and you think, well, for the length of this class, I will not tell anyone a lie. And then one makes a virtuous act out of that strength. And a complete act, because the completion is, for the length of this class, I will not lie. And at other times, it may not be a duration, it'll just be, and I will not do it, relating to a specific event. And at other times, it may well be a duration, a one-day vow, or for one's lifetime.
Yeah, that. Sudi Jen Sheba Shaw said that in some Tanaji Paris, or do she that in Masan usually.
And then the final sentence in this point, the other parts of action should be understood in this manner. So that concludes looking at the virtuous actions, and then tomorrow we'll start with the effects of virtuous actions. Okay, thank you.